Well, hello and welcome back aboard sailing vessel Dream Chaser. I know if you've been watching this channel for a while, it's been a long time since we've done boat-related work on video. Owning a boat means the work actually never stops. I just stopped recording the videos once we finished most of the refit. So you've seen us on it from time to time. But today's another project, and what we notice is our jib sheet traveler rail, where we have these cars that we can adjust and move forward or backward to change the angle of the jib sheet when we're sailing. I'll show a close-up of this in a minute, but essentially the thin wood piece spacer that goes below the metal rail has started to rot. And what we need to do is pull this rail off, pull off that rotted piece of wood, inspect the actual tow rail itself. I think I'm actually going to take advantage of this, and I'm going to sand it all down and varnish it while the rail is off. We'll make a new spacer out of wood, and then we'll reinstall this rail. What's interesting is the sheer volume of screws in this thing. There's probably about 65 or 70 long screws that hold this thing in. As you can imagine, this thing takes a tremendous amount of load. So when that sail is out here, right, this boat has over 1,800 square feet of sail. I don't remember exactly what the jib is, but that wind blowing from the side is pulling on this and can be quite a bit of pressure. So there are a lot of screws in there, and it alternates. Each screw is probably 3 or 4 inches apart, and in the middle between each one is a small divot, and that's where you can lock the cars or the tie downs to. So let me show you this thing up close, and then we'll start removing this. I'll show you the way we remove this and the safe way we do it, so that if we make a mistake, we don't drop it down into the water. And you can kind of see this rail I'm talking about. You see it starts right there before the rigging, kind of goes right down along the tow rail of the boat. And what's interesting is, here's a great example. This is the purpose of this thing. You can see this little car, they call this. The jib sheet goes from the forward sail, the aft end of the forward sail, through that little pulley and to the back of the boat where you can tighten them up. That little knob on the left-hand side allows you to lift that up and slide this car up or down the track as you need it to change the pitch and the angle. So I'm going to use that car to tie this thing down so that we don't risk dropping this in the water when we take all these screws out. And you can see it goes all the way down to the boarding ladder. Now, I'll show you something kind of interesting here. Let's just take a look, and you can see the number of screws in this thing. They're 3 to 4 inches apart. There's a screw on the forward side and the back side, and right in the middle are one of those divots that the cars lock into. So you can see just how many screws we're going to have to remove here. So let's start by being smart about this. What I don't want to do is take all these screws out and have this thing fall down into the water. So we are going to go ahead and just tie a line around this thing. Just do a nice simple bowl in here. Make a loop. Out the hole, around the tree, back down the hole. That's the old saying here. And pull on all sides, get this tightened up. There we go. Easy to untie and good and secure. All right, so these things have a small end cap that prevents the car from going off the end. So I'm going to remove that first, and then we're just going to start removing these screws. Those 2 screws out, we can get this piece removed. Do it very carefully. I don't want to drop this overboard. All right, and now we just start making progress. You can see that bend is starting to come out of that a little bit already. Over here. Yeah, right here. Hey, do me a favor. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like it, subscribe to the channel and click on that little bell notification so you get notified of new videos. Thanks. I'll tell you what, when you have to hold on to this rail after sitting in this South Florida sun, that is hot, hot. All right. Got my other end cap right here. And we have our rail ready to slide out of here. All right, with the forward line adhered to this, I'm going to slide this off the end of here so we don't have this drop in. Slide it right off of our rail. You can see just how rotted that wood is. Wow.
That's not good right there. More on this in a moment.
All right, we've got this pulled out of here, but this is really interesting. There is a very weak spot right here, and you can see it's got a hairline crack in it. I could easily break this in two. I'm gonna try not to, because I'm gonna have to get another one of these made, or I may cut it a little shorter and decide not to have as long of a jib track as I had. It's gonna all depend on how hard this is to find and the condition of the other one. Though the other one doesn't have rot underneath it, so I suspect it won't be as bad, but my guess is, well, I don't know if it's a stress fracture or what, but it ain't supposed to bend like that, that's for sure.
With the jib track off, it's now time to prepare the surface a little bit where the screw holes had been. The way this was assembled is there was a small wood spacer that was nailed to the actual teak rail, and then the jib track was laid on top of that and screwed through the jib track, through the spacer, and down into the teak tow rail. What I'm going to do here is sand this top smooth, and I'm not doing a finish sand here. I'm just using 80 grit to go ahead and get the area underneath that spacer relatively smooth. This will allow me to do two things. First, I'm going to go ahead and fill each of the screw holes with epoxy, letting it soak down into the screw holes all the way down through that teak rail, even into anything that's down below it. Certainly can't hurt to add some epoxy and make it all stronger. At that point, I will resand the top of it, finish sand it, varnish it all before putting a spacer and the jib track back on. In order to not drill holes back through the epoxy holes that I filled, I'll slide the jib track forward or aft about 1.5 inches. That way, the new screws go between each of the existing screw holes that have been filled with epoxy. I think overall it's a good plan, but I still have a lot of cleanup and sanding to go, so forgive the fast motion here.
Okay, it's a couple of days later since I took that jib track off and went ahead and sanded the tow rail. When I was taking the tow rail off, or taking the jib track off the tow rail, I noticed a couple of the screws were loose. Right? They weren't held in there really good, almost as if they stripped out the wood inside of it. Or, the worst thing is, maybe there's a little bit of rot. I've used Git Rot before on the last boat I had, and it was really, really good for taking a small porous area that didn't have water in it and kind of making it a little bit more solid. Now my plan right now is to put this jib track back on and move it, shift it about 1.5 inches so that the screw holes go through every other place where they were before, not in the same holes. But I am going to leverage those holes right now, and I'm going to put some penetrating epoxy in there. West Marine didn't actually have any Git Rot brand. They have their own. It's ironic how their stuff looks exactly like the brand names kind of it. But it's essentially a very thin epoxy. And what happens is it flows very easily into an opening, and then ultimately the thinner evaporates out, leaving epoxy inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to put it in each of those screw holes so that I get a nice and thin layer of penetrating epoxy down inside of there and see just how much it absorbs. I'll then go back and with a thickened epoxy, and I won't be using the penetrating epoxy, I'll just use regular West Systems epoxy with a thickening agent. I will fill each of those individual holes, and then we'll resand it, and that will get us prepped before we put the new jib track back on. So let me show you how we mix this stuff up. I went ahead and waited several days though, because I wanted any kind of moisture that might have been in there to dry out. Applicator bottle, resin, and hardener. This says 8 ounces. This is probably about half full. Now, as you likely know, epoxy does not start to form its chemical reaction until the two parts are mixed together. So you want to be very careful you don't confuse these lids or mix them up with one another. And this is a science, so you want your measurements to be exact. Now we repeat the process with our hardener, and we go right up to our part B line. 50%, half the amount of the resin. You'll notice how much thinner this is than regular epoxy as well. Put our lid on. And now we do that 70s song, shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake, shake. Shake your epoxy. Shake your epoxy. You want to do this for a full 60 seconds, so I won't waste your time doing this whole thing on tape. Epoxy's shaken up real good. I'm just going to go ahead and apply a little bit in here slowly. A couple of things you want to certainly do. Have you some gloves ready, because you'll make a mess. And I've got a couple of quick paper towels just in the event I get any that runs somewhere. I can catch it before it runs off of the wood and onto, you know, the fiberglass anywhere. Now what we don't want to do is let this stuff completely set up and then come back to do it again later. We want to keep applying it if it's still absorbing some of this stuff. And just let this stuff keep absorbing in as it will. And where you think you have quite a bit of going in, you can also take this, if it'll fit, just apply gentle pressure. I don't know if you can see it going down the nozzle, but it is going down into there. Got two holes that are really accepting quite a bit. This is the other one right back here. I've used up that little bottle. I'm just wiping this a little bit up here. I'll sand the rest of it, but at least it gets that part nice and smooth. Now what that tells me is, down in this wooden section where these two rails come together, there's probably just a little bit of rot in there. Disappointing, but I'm going to fill that sucker with epoxy real good. And then it'll be solid, so won't have to worry about that. But this is what causes that is, you know, these holes over time weren't bedded well, and you know, water just leaked down into those.